Join the Betamax Video Club. We're winding back to our favourite films that are set in the 80s, or the 2080s in this case. My name's Rich Nelson, and tonight I've rented Total Recall. Watching it with me is Jimmy Fletcher. Hi Jimmy, how are you?
Hi Rich, yeah, I'm good, thanks. Thank you for asking me to talk about Total Recall, one of my favourite films.
Well, thank you for coming back, and for this Patreon special, I guess most of these are either set in the 80s or something, so I've been really tenuous with this one. Now, what's so special about Total Recall for you?
Okay, well, I loved my action films in the 90s, really, because I was too young to watch them at the cinema in the 80s, but I caught a lot of them when they were premiered on TV, or I borrowed them from friends' houses and stuff like that. And Total Recall was one of these. I don't know if you remember them, but ITV had back in the days when film premieres were like a really big deal. They had this sponsorship agreement with Diet Coke, and you'd have the Diet Coke movie premieres, which were from about 93 to about 97. And it seemed like every week they would be premiering a new film. And for someone like me who didn't own many video cassettes outside of sort of James Bond films or Ghostbusters cartoons and stuff like that, these were the first times I've ever seen these films. And Total Recall, I think, was one of the first examples. It was one of the first films that was shown, and it was one of those. They showed it after the news at 10, and I was like, I had to go to school the next day because I was only like 12 years old. So I was a bit, I was underage watching this, but everybody had seen it, so it doesn't matter. And I stayed up late, and I was so excited because I'd already seen a snippet of Total Recall at my elder cousin's house. It was like a house do, and I was the youngest person there by a considerable distance. They were all talking their adult thing, and I was bored, and I was rooting around my cousin's video collection, and they had Terminator 2 and Total Recall, and I just thought, well, no one's noticing. I'll just slip on Total Recall, and and I put it on, and it was great. And then it starts really good. Arnie's eyes come out of his head a bit. I was like, okay, no one noticed that. That's fine. And then you've got Sharon Stone sort of in her underwear, sort of unlacing her bra and everything. And then that's when my mum noticed. And she went, that's going off. And I went, fair enough. I lasted 5 minutes. That's pretty good. So when I got round to watching it on telly, I was quite excited to see that bit and the rest of the film. And I adored it. I'd already seen a few Arnie films by that point. Again, all on ITV, like Predator and Commando, stuff like that. This one I feel is like above and beyond pretty much every Arnie film. I think it's the perfect Schwarzenegger film because it's got quite a few Arnie films are quite clever in some sense. Like Terminator and Terminator 2 are quite, they're not dumb movies. But then obviously you do have his sort of the dumber side like Commando and Raw Deal. And I think that Total Recall is kind of the ultimate brain and brawn movie because the plot is ridiculously clever and really smart. But it's also a film of snappy one-liners, a body count of 77 people according to IMDb, just brutal violence, silly humour. And for a 12-year-old at the time, it was perfect. I absolutely adored it. And I sort of have watched it a ridiculous amount of times since. Watched it again today, and it just feels, like a virgin, like just like the very first time. Yeah, not as sexy as that, though, but.
Well, I don't know. Had its moments.
Yeah, I suppose the last resort bits, that's got some, yeah.
I mean, like you said, it's weird. Having I haven't seen this for probably a few years, but again, sort of for a period, it was almost my go-to Schwarzenegger film. And while I'd say my perfect Arnie film is probably Predator, I think when you come to this one, and I was describing it to someone on WhatsApp today who hadn't seen it before. Hi, Katrin. And I was sort of saying it's a really clever story. It's very well realized. There's all these subplots of, the mind and memory, and obviously it's based on a short story by Philip K. Dick, who wrote what kind of turned out to be Blade Runner. And then with this, they've taken all that and then chucked a load of blood and squibs and Arnold Schwarzenegger on top, and to a lot of people, I'll be honest, that might put them off. I mean, for me, very much the opposite. It's great, and we've got all these things that, having recently rewatched RoboCop for the podcast as well, the way that sits with this, they're so. I mean, of course, they've got the same director, and bits and bobs of the same. Got Ronnie Cox, who was in both movies, and just the little things like when you said that he wakes up from this dream and Sharon Stone's there in her nightie or whatever, and the first thing he does is he watches the news, and it's almost like a sequel to RoboCop in the way that they flick the news on, and it's almost like a joke news story, a joke advert, which sort of talked about on that episode. But I've been coming to it now. It's so much more clever, and there's so much more intelligence behind it than just a standard Schwarzenegger
I
beat 'em up.
agree. Don't get me wrong. I love that kind of Arnie film as well. I mean, Commando is just a joy. I can watch it again and again and again. But obviously, it only works on so many levels, whereas I think Total Recall works on a lot more. And it could have been different because this is films had such a convoluted and long-winded history. It was written in like the mid 70s originally by Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, who created Alien, but they just couldn't get anybody to back it because the whole Philip K. Dick thing. It is his stories. They get adapted a lot, but they are potentially very uncommercial because they're so mind-bendingly odd, and they play with ideas of what's reality, what's not, who am I, that sort of thing. And with a film like Blade Runner, which wasn't a hit, but did end up becoming, a huge cult success and now pretty much appreciated as one of the best films ever made. I think it is the best film ever made, from my opinion. But at one point, David Cronenberg was going to direct Total Recall, and you can imagine Cronenberg's made a few sort of mildly commercial films like The Dead Zone or The Fly, but I think it would have been an extremely different film. And in the end, he sort of left the project because there was differences as to what this film was going to be. He wanted to make a proper Philip K. Dick adaptation, but Ronald Shusett said, "I want to make Raiders of the Lost Ark in space," which is totally different. And who knows? I was going to say if they remade Total Recall, they did, didn't they? If they remade Total Recall and made it more faithful to the Dick story, then we could end up with a completely different movie. So I'm not fussed that the film Total Recall is, even for all its intelligence, it's also a film, where Arnie goes "screw you" and like puts a drill in some guy's chest. I think it's a good sort of compromise between something really intelligent and something just balls to the wall, crowd pleasing, action packed fun. So yeah, I'm happy with it. I think it's a tremendous Schwarzenegger performance. I think it's one of his best performances. I do think Schwarzenegger's a great actor for what he does. Not always a great actor, but in this, I think he's tremendous. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean the whole concept of, I mean, it sounds almost ridiculous to explain, but the idea of purchasing memories because
Yeah.
to avoid, I mean, it's almost like, you can't afford a holiday or you don't want to go somewhere dangerous, so we'll give you the memory of the holiday. And, coming back to this 30 years after the film came out, it still seems ridiculous, but you're almost wondering, like, someone must be working on something like this somewhere. And the whole concept of you can pretend, you can make a story out of it. It's not just 2 weeks of memory somewhere by a beach. Schwarzenegger goes to this place called Recall and essentially buys a package that implies he's a secret agent, and he can choose the woman, the sort of the romantic interest in his memories. And that's a bit almost like weird science. There's the computer screen and you're choosing, he chooses a brunette who's sleazy and demure and
Or Demure, as he says. He says
demure.
Demure. Yeah.
And again, this is, it's Arnie basically choosing any woman co-star from the films of that era. I mean,
Yeah.
they're all quite interchangeable. I mean, you could change the lady from this with the actress from The Running Man, and you probably get exactly the same turnout. But
That's interesting. Yeah, he had a lot
yeah,
to. I mean, he was very heavily involved with the casting and the promotion, pretty much everything. I mean, he was a major sort of influence. I don't think he's listed as a producer, but to all intents and purposes, he was. But yeah, I agree with this, especially nowadays. Right now with the pandemic, and we've had lockdown and holidays have had to be cancelled. I mean, I was going to go to New York in May, and that couldn't happen. So in a way, it's almost like, well, I didn't get to go, but I guess it could be safer if I bought the memory of going to New York. It's quite a prescient idea. This, and like you say, it's so outrageous still. Some of these films that are set in the future, obviously, they're dated, but something like this hasn't dated yet because it's still so insane, really, in concept. But I'm really fascinated by it because when I first watched Total Recall, I was thinking it's just a memory. You didn't go, It's how can that be better than the real thing? But then once you've been had an experience and it's over and done with, that's all it is. It is a memory. And I was very, as the more I watch it, the more I think actually that does sound quite fascinating and quite appealing. This idea of, and it's a perfect memory as well, because like, you get a memory, go to Marbella for real when you're like, well, there's like feral cats, hanging around the house. They're probably ripe with disease and all that. The perfect version wouldn't have that. It'd have like a Persian cat, and it would be beautiful, and everything would be perfect. And in the end, the memory will last a lot longer than the actual thing itself. So I was, I find it a fascinating thing, and also the idea that can you trust your memory? Can you trust your mind? Because Arnold Schwarzenegger was very fascinated by the idea that it was his mind that was under attack, and physically he's not a very vulnerable person. Like in Commando, literally, like in Commando, he'll throw a grenade and it will kill 3 people. They throw a grenade at him and he gets like a little bruise on his abdomen. And whereas his mind is just as vulnerable a thing as anybody else's. And that's a clever thing in Total Recall, that this is probably the film where he seems most in danger. He seems more panicked. He seems more something, like when he's locked in the mind thing at the when Cohagen and all that lot have got him. You're thinking, oh my god, he's screwed. But, and when he potentially will erase his memory and implant the old one back in, you just think all the muscles in the world can't help him, but actually they do in the end because he manages to escape, quite ridiculously. But I think that's what's good about this film, is that it sort of puts a spin on the Arnold Schwarzenegger that we kind of expected, because he's only been 6 years since the Terminator, but he'd already been in so many films since then. He'd been in Commando and Raw Deal and Running Man and Red Heat and I don't know, Twins, I guess. And the idea was, no one can mess with Arnie, but in this one, I think he turns people's expectations around on that, and prepared to look stupid as well, because he's sort of wearing a towel on his head for about 20 minutes of the film and looks quite ridiculous.
But the whole thing seems to work, and there's this concept that I hadn't really thought about before, where again jumping ahead, and if you haven't seen the film, go and see it, blah blah blah, where the film ends and it's still left quite ambiguous as to, did this actually happen?
Yeah.
Was this just a memory? Because essentially when he goes to recall and chooses his package, and again it's supposed to be a perfect memory, and it's like you've been on holiday except you don't have the rubbish merchandise and you haven't come back with some sort of sexually transmitted disease. But yeah, well, it depends if you, as you said, been to the last resort. But
Exactly.
the film ends and you kind of think, well, did this really happen, or was this just what he paid for? He was the secret agent who ended up with the girl that he chose and that was supposedly of his dreams. And it just, I hadn't really thought about that before, and you kind of think the whole concept of it at the end. And again, I'm not going to keep chucking this back to Blade Runner because that's chalk and cheese in many ways. But again, there's that whole ambiguous ending to that, whereas like, is Deckard a replicant or not? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But with this, it's just so, gives you the intelligence, it gives you the thought, it gives you the idea of the brain and its vulnerabilities and what it can do, and yet you've got Arnie kicking off in a thing. He wakes up in a Johnny cab, which even now, where I work, we talk about people, as I always refer to it as a Johnny cab. For some reason, it seems to be something that's stuck in the mind.
You're in a Johnny cab.
I mean, what am I doing here?
I'm sorry. Would you please rephrase the question? Huh?
How did I get in this taxi?
The door opened. You got in.
And then all of a sudden he's grabbed by Joey's dad from Friends, and he kills these sort of faceless goons, and there's all this stuff blabbed about the mission, and it's just so obviously ridiculous, and yet when you think about it in the concept of the story,
Yes.
is this the memory? And then he goes back to his wife, who isn't really his wife apparently, and it's just so, say it easily, brilliant. because you've got the violence, you've got the blood, but you've also got that kind of suspense and thriller of like, are they really after me? And it's almost like a paranoia sort of thing as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's the thing. The plot is constantly keeping you on your toes. It's not like a foregone conclusion. Again, you keep going back to Blade Runner. I keep going back to Commando. But as soon as his daughter's kidnapped, it's like, well, he's going to save her and he's going to kill everybody, and that's it. It's just, and then the fun is seeing that inevitability play out. Whereas in Total Recall, I mean, very, like you say, very interesting because yes, he is invincible, but once you accept that as part of this package that he's got, where he is invincible as part of the story, because at one point he's walking through a security sort of barrier and he's been caught with the gun and he jumps through the glass. That's impossible. But you accept it. You accept it anyway, even if it wasn't a potential dream story, because that's the sort of thing that Arnie does. But you kind of get away with it in this one even more because, well, he's a secret agent. He's a top secret agent. I have a copy actually here of the old film magazine Neon, which came out in the late 90s. It was a really quite irreverent film magazine that sort of tried to sort of steal a lot of Empire's thunder. And every month they had a feature where a group of professionals would, like in one, for example, they had some real East London gangsters view a bunch of Cockney gangster movies and would say, "Oh, is this realistic? Is this not?" And sometimes they'd say, "Yeah, that was good," or "That was bollocks." And in this issue that I've got here, it was a couple of doctors who were basically observing the physical punishment that's inflicted on characters in films and whether they would actually survive to the end of the movie. So
I remember that actually. I remember something about I think Die Hard. I think it was one of the
yes,
ones I
yeah,
remember.
Die Hard is yes. They talk about Die Hard and Cape Fear because Robert De Niro goes through a hell of a lot, and they talk about Goldfinger, Rambo 3, and Home Alone. Obviously
Oh,
what happens to the two burglars. But one of the things they talk about in Total Recall is the amount of testicular trauma that Arnie goes through in this film because he gets kicked and punched in the bollocks 3 times in terms of plot in the space of about 24 hours. And I just love the kind of just matter of fact, speech here where they say repeated blows to the genitals are not good for you. You could have a severe scrotal hematoma. The scrotum is a low pressure bag. So if you cause some trauma to the testes, then there's nothing to stop the bleeding. So it grows and grows until your balls are the size of melons. It won't kill you. It just makes it very difficult to walk. So, but Arnie doesn't seem to have a problem with that because he's running through, running up escalators and using people as human shields about 2 seconds later. But again, if it's all part of the character that he's playing, then I've got no problem with that. To be honest, it is fun. And in terms of the plot sort of twisting and turning and going back to seeing Sharon Stone, his wife, is actually quite duplicitous. I mean, the trailers give it away anyway. You even see her die in the trailer, but I love that the plot sort of goes one direction and then just throws it a curveball, and then all of a sudden the wife he's apparently loved and been married to for years is now trying to kill him with a knife, and then you're thrown into the deep end with this whole thing. You're not who you thought you were. You are actually a fake person. And again, talking about the vulnerability, one thing that Arnie's always had is that sense of confidence. It's again Commando. When he gets when he's doing, I just love that film. When his daughter's kidnapped, it's not like I'm never going to get her back. I'm never going. It's like we're back, and I'm going to kill everybody. Whereas in this one, he's the rug's pulled out from under him, and he actually says, "If I'm not me, then who the hell am I?" And that's a sort of crisis of confidence that an Arnie character had never had, never had in a film before. And that's why I love this film because it's a sort of a more, I can't say a tender side because of Arnie because he does brutally violent things in this film, but it humanizes him in a way. And I quite like that because he's very good. He can be quite a self-deprecating actor. He can poke fun at himself, like I said, with the towel on his head earlier. And this sets the sort of second act of Total Recall in motion, where he's kind of constantly, he's never really settled in the film. He's always like questioning, or he's being betrayed, or he's being pursued and chased. and that's why I think it sort of stands up as this kind of edgy, suspenseful film.
And for those of you who are listening who are fans of the title of the film being used, I think it's at this point when he's used the fellow as a human shield because he's being chased by Richter,
Yeah.
who's the great Michael Ironside,
Oh yeah.
Jester from Top Gun, and I think he says, because he speaks to Cohagen, Ronnie Cox, who's the sort of big boss, and he says he could have total recall.
Oh yeah.
What the fuck is going on down there?
I'm trying to neutralize a traitor, sir.
If I wanted him dead, you moron, I wouldn't have dumped him on Earth.
We can't let him run around. He knows too much.
Laurie says he can't remember jack shit.
That's now. In an hour, he could have total recall.
And you just kind of think this is like, I mean, someone sent me the. Do you remember the bit from Family Guy where they have a couple of clips?
Yes.
This will be where I'll be Superman 4: The Quest for Peace.
Yeah.
Obligatory Superman 4 reference there.
I love it. Yeah, yeah.
And that you just kind of sit there going, yeah, there you go.
Oh yeah, I miss that.
And this whole thing, I mean, I didn't realize until I did some reading about the film after I watched it that the subway setting was all in Mexico.
Yes, it was.
You know, because you kind of think about how, you know, there are certain parts, and I'll use London because it suits us.
Yeah.
How they used was it Canary Wharf or Canada Water for scenes in Rogue One, Star Wars, because the bits on this can make me test my patience here. Scarif, I think.
I think that's the name of the island. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's Scarif, where they are essentially running through Canary Wharf tube station, but they mock it up to look like an imperial base.
Oh wow.
But here they used the Mexico City subway system, which I guess in 1989 or 1990 when they filmed it would have looked that futuristic. They think this could be 100 years in the future, and it looks great. I mean, it is futuristic, and I suppose it's ideal. You don't have to spend too much of your production budget tidying it all up. But this is just a great chase scene where, like you said, you know, Schwarzenegger ends up in an apartment with a wet towel around his head and gets this suitcase off an old woman. And this is one of my favourite bits where the fella, his sort of old colleague, leaves the suitcase by the phone box, which again dates the film. But then the old woman takes it and she says, "Fuck you, asshole," and he bows.
Excuse me, ma'am, but this is mine.
I don't see your name on it.
Someone left it for me.
Go find your own bag.
Excuse me, ma'am, but I need it.
Fuck you, you asshole.
He does bow, yeah.
You know, this old woman treats Arnold Schwarzenegger with a volley of abuse, and he just bows and takes it. It's just brilliant.
He's got no time. If he had, he probably would have broke a neck or something. But I do like the whole concept of the rude old lady. You know, you have it in The Running Man as well, where she says she calls Ben Richards one mean motherfucker or something like that, and it's like, oh, bless her. It is cute. Yeah, you talk about the budget and the not the budget, the way the film looks. I mean, because this was one of the most expensive films ever made when it came out, and yet it's kind of got a really cool futuristic look, but it's kind of sort of really how can I put it? It's not immersive in the way that Blade Runner is. It's not trying to go for this sort of minuscule detail. It's quite garish, and like if you look at the backgrounds when they're doing the news reports, it's these sort of blue and white stripes behind them. It's quite day glow and sort of fluorescent, and especially when they get to Mars, because obviously a lot of it's set in the red light district area, so it's quite pulpy and like a comic book. Really, it's not trying to go for this sort of immersive environment. It's kind of like a dingy future. Yeah, it doesn't immediately sort of like wow you in the way that sort of Blade Runner does, but it's still quite a good look. And obviously filming around concrete and steel in the way that they did in these sort of Mexican like malls and stuff like that. It doesn't really date the film in a sense.
I think it just works nicely. I think again the concept that this is an Earth where I wouldn't say people have left it. They haven't gone to Mars en masse or anything.
No.
But you know there are parts of it, and again this is the great bit where, you know, he's chased by Richter and he rips out the Johnny cab and says, "Sue me, dickhead."
The fare is 18 credits, please.
Sue me, dickhead.
And it's, you know, where the bit that you kind of think, and it's some interesting model work again, where, you know, and again it was RoboCop again, where Rob Bottin from The Thing was the special effects supervisor, and you know this was one of the sort of films where they used a lot of practical effects that, yes, some of them look a bit weird now, and it's almost like watching in the Terminator when Schwarzenegger sort of removes his eye and it's clearly a model. And
Yeah,
I think it's difficult when you kind of think at the time it's completely groundbreaking, but
yeah,
in the way that even but now you could look at the CGI of one of the Star Wars prequels and go, oh my god,
that looks bad. Yeah,
yeah. But when he takes the bug out of his nose,
yeah. It's a bit, and
like,
when the mask, the 2 weeks woman, when her sort of head comes off. But you know what? It's so weird because yes, they look fake, but there is a sort of there's something about it. It still looks kind of unearthly and unreal in a good way. Like when you do see
yeah,
his eye removed in the Terminator, because I watched it the other night. And yes, it doesn't look right, but it looks frightening to me. I find it still inhuman and strange looking. And in both cases of, it's not like it doesn't bother me in the way that the end of like the Mummy Returns bothers me, where you see the Rock as a scorpion, and there's nothing remotely convincing about it. I mean, it just looks tacky and terrible. But in Total Recall, like the thing coming out the nose, or even the bits at the end when they're sort of suffocating on Mars. Yeah, they look a bit obviously like models, but I think special effects are as good as the film sort of makes them out to be, if that makes sense. I think if the film has belief in its effects and it presents them in a way or backs them with the right kind of music or the right kind of performance, I'm willing to go along with it. And I mean, I guess because I've grown up with this film and I was originally wowed at it at the time, I think if a new person watched this now, they probably would just go, "Oh, that looks shit." But I personally don't have a problem with them. Yet at the same time, I will admit, yeah, there's some obvious prosthetics going on there.
but I
Yeah.
mean the bit where he removes the bug from his nose, and despite no matter how weird the model looks, you still think, "Ay."
I
But
still wince because that still looks really
yeah,
painful. You're hearing the crunch, and you're hearing, and Jerry Goldsmith's like, "Yeah, this is good," and sort of like ramps up the the music quite a bit, And yeah, I mean, speaking of Jerry Goldsmith, I mean, this is the second episode in a row that I've done where it's a Goldsmith scored film, and that's a habit I'm happy to keep because he's my favourite composer, and because we talked about the Burbs, and Goldsmith did a brilliant score for that, and he's a great collaborator with Joe Dante, and I think he only did three films with Verhoeven. He did this, Basic Instinct, and Hollow Man. And they're a dream partnership. And Total Recall is one of my all-time favorite music scores. I mean, when at the very beginning of the film, when the Corolco logo sort of comes into shape, and then Goldsmith's like those drums and the way it just comes in like that. I honestly, it's like watching Star Wars. The big Star Wars logo at the start of all of those films. I'm like, oh, I'm ready for now. I'm ready now. I really want to watch this film. I can't wait. And it is such a great score. Again, like the Burbs, it's a lot of mix of synthesizers and sort of strings, and it still sounds really fresh. It still sounds incredible, really exciting. I don't know many action scores these days that I was as gripping as that. Really.
no, and I should really put together some sort of league table. I'm sure, the other, because I mean Goldsmith did the Rambo films, or
Yes.
the first, and you kind of think of all the other ones he's done. Like I think because I've only recently done my first John Williams one, or
Wow.
two by this point, but
Yeah.
obviously haven't done Star Wars yet, so that'll be it. But I think again, just I mean that came on again, dating this slightly. I mean, it's the end of July, and I've only recently kind of bought Spotify because I probably should actually buy music and not try and ponce it off the radio. And
You're still using a cassette, are you? You're still taping it off the
well, yeah,
radio?
that's
Yeah.
got to make mixtapes for people. And you can't do a playlist. What's a playlist? Yeah, you got to just pause it when the adverts
Oh
come
yeah.
on.
Yeah.
But yeah, and this was on one of the sort of algorithm things that it works out, and it always pops up with this dream, isn't it? Is the main
Yes. Yeah.
theme for this. Some stuff from Rocky 4, Transformers the movie, the main theme from Terminator,
Oh yeah.
and then when it came on in the car the other day, and I think my youngest daughter just went, "What's that noise?" And it was
Oh
it was the opening to this, and I thought, I know you're two, but I can't always listen to Hey Dougie, and it's just
no.
like,
No, more Hey Douglas Quaid. You know what I mean? That's the version I like. I remember when because I recorded a sort of fan commentary track for this film about 7 years ago with my mate Mark, and I gave a listen to it again the other day because I was like, oh, I'm going to say, I don't want to sort of nick his theories about the film and pass them off as my own subconsciously. But I do remember when I recorded that originally that I was listening to the Total Recall soundtrack when I was on my way to work, and I was on the escalator when the track "Clever Girl" is on, which is the track that leads into the bit where the bloke's getting shot up on the escalator, and I was listening to it, and everybody's just going on their way to work, and I just thought, maybe I could just grab this guy in front of me and pretend he's a human shield, but I stopped myself, because that's just not on.
No, it's not the done. It depends on the station, I guess, doesn't it?
I think it was Angel. I think.
Oh, well, that's a long escalator.
It is a long escalator. Yeah, if it had been Hoban, I think I definitely would have done it. But no, I stopped myself.
Well, at this point, we've had he's had the video message from himself,
Yes.
basically telling him to get his ass to Mars.
Get your ass to Mars.
At this point, it just makes it seem like, he says, "Oh, if you're watching this, then they've got me, and you have to get your ass to Mars to fix this, whatever." And this is where the movie shifts. It moves from Earth, and I think at one point, someone on IMDb or Google or whatever has worked out that this is set roughly, I think it said about, I'll call it Old El Paso, like a fajita mix, but in El Paso in Texas.
Yeah.
And then at this point, he's gone to Mars, and this is where there's obviously some freight travel or passenger travel between Earth and Mars, and it's probably a good thing they didn't film that bit, because even in 2084, I mean, how long is it going to take to get from Earth to Mars? This is the great bit that I always love when it is immigration, and we're talking about a time in the UK, and I don't want to talk about politics and all that, but where people talk about border control and passports and everything else, and this large middle-aged woman turns up at border control with a passport, and it's just brilliant the way that this guy, things are happening. There's Richter and his goons are obviously on the same travel and transport coming through, and when the immigration says, "How long is your stay?" and she says 2 weeks, and I just love the fact that as soon as he says, "Was it business or pleasure?" and she says 2 weeks, and immediately it's like,
Yeah.
wobble, wobble.
Have you brought any fruits or vegetables onto the planet?
2 weeks.
Excuse me?
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Oh, absolutely fantastic. The way, I mean, how Richter has then recognised this middle-aged large woman as Quaid.
Yeah,
It's
true.
It's immediately kind of like, are you saying that she's a bodybuilder of some sort? But it's just fantastic, and I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think. I haven't been on a flight in a couple of years, so I don't know what it's like these days if someone like that starts having a mental health breakdown of some kind, and everyone just stops and stares, and all these soldiers with huge guns just sort of line up and gawp at the woman, sort of going gurning. But then it's just the fact that, like you pointed out earlier, that the mask opens, because it is a mask. It opens really cool the way it kind of shifts horizontally across.
Oh, I
And
love it.
there's
I love it.
Arnie as a shrunken head inside it. And then the mask turns into a bomb because it's Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, I never really understood it, but it's so inspired how insane that imagery is. She's this sort of, her ear sort of comes out, and then her hair falls off, and then it goes back in her head, and that's pretty crazy imagery for a sort of summer blockbuster, and I'm really impressed that they sort of went with that as one of the sort of the key images in the trailers, because to be honest, you see it, you don't forget it. It's some of the imagery in this film is bonkers, and that speaking of the mutants, by the way, in terms of crazy imagery, that was Cronenberg who come up with the idea of the mutants on Mars. He's not credited in the film, but that was him. But yeah, it's brilliant. I don't know how the head is a bomb. I don't know how Arnie knew that the head was a bomb. Maybe there was instructions in that briefcase. I don't know.
Well, the thing is, in that briefcase, there was a I think you could see when he was empty, there was the kind of mustard yellow fabric. So there must have been the whatever, the cardigan, moo whatever it was that it was wearing. But I didn't look big enough for an explosive head.
No, No, mate, it's flat packed. I'm not sure, but this is stuff we need to ask for Hoven if there's ever a Q&A, I imagine. So
We'll keep trying, keep trying.
yeah.
And as he gets to Mars, it's again like how I suppose it's interesting. How do you make it Earth-like? And you put in a Hilton, and
Yeah.
he goes off to the Hilton. He gets in the cab with Benny, who's got 5 kids to feed, as he likes to keep reminding us. But when he gets to the hotel, one thing I noted when he uses one of the fake IDs he's got, and there's a flyer in the safe deposit box, and it has on the back of it for a good time called Melina.
Yeah.
And then he says, "Can I borrow your pen?" And it's almost like, do you not recognise your own handwriting?
Yeah, it is totally for the benefit of the audience, that bit. And yes, it explains it to us, but that actually is the most unrealistic bit in the film. I do, yeah, it's the only bit where I think, no, I'm not accepting that. Everything else is cool, but no.
So within 5 minutes of that, we see a woman with 3 breasts, but this is the unrealistic bit.
I'm cool with that. And to be honest,
Okay.
that's very convincing makeup work by Robbo Team there, to be honest. I was looking really hard at them, and it's amazing, to be honest. I'm like, where does the real one, I was just, but then I sort of stepped away from the TV and thought, no.
Well, there's a bit later on where Benny's kind of manhandling them, and the texture looks, I would say like the 40-year-old virgin, where he said it looks like a bag of sand. But it's clearly a lot of work's gone into them.
Yeah.
But then this is the thing: we go to the last resort bar, which is this seedy bar, which of course every resort has to have, whether you're on Mars or Southend or anything like that, Amsterdam, and there's probably a branch in Holborn, I think, next to the Griffin. And the bit, and I didn't realise until I looked in the credits that the actor who played Tony, the guy with the sort of really mutated head,
Yeah.
was actually Hank in Breaking Bad.
It was, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I sort of recognised him as at the time, or a bit later, I'm not sure, but he's one of the sort of the doomed coppers in Lethal Weapon 2. The squad, the ones who get blown up by the bad guys. But yeah, it's nice because he sort of had these little roles in these films, and then he kind of went off the radar, and then he came back in Breaking Bad in such a great role, and it was really nice. Yeah, and yeah, the 3-breasted woman is she is the hooker in Lethal Weapon, the one who gets her out. She's blown up in the house, so she has a bad time of things in action movies, to be honest.
The actress who played Thumbelina, the small person, was Valerie Vomit in the Garbage Pail Kids.
Oh, really? Oh, that's a career. That's a hell of a career. Yeah.
A lot of the actors from the Garbage Pail Kids went on to do different things. I mean, the guy who was, I think it was Greaser Greg, who does the voice of Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, okay.
And yet you've got the actor who played Valerie Vomit goes on to be a small hooker in a seedy bar on Mars.
Yeah.
I suppose that's what links Winnie the Pooh to her.
Yeah. 6 Degrees of Thumbelina. Oh,
I'll play that game.
I'll play it too. But yeah, The Last Resort is your sort of typical kind of sleazoid red light district bar, and we also get to see, I suppose at this point we don't know who he is, but this is Quato, isn't it? The revolutionary, who's he was the bad guy in Twins. He was. Yeah. And he was also the coach in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, one of my sort of secret favourite films that I love very much. Yeah, and
you can call it a guilty pleasure. It's fine.
I was going to try and avoid saying those words because I feel like I'm doing it a disservice. Yeah, I love it. I just love it.
Sort of, I've got a couple of bits to add to that later on when we talk about Quato.
Yeah.
Quaid goes back to Quaid Schwarzenegger goes back to the hotel, and there's this part which this is where it becomes almost like Inception, where the guy turns up because we've already seen him on the advert for Recall on the train, and he's the doctor who turns up and is trying to convince Quaid that this is a dream, and it's a dream within a dream, and there's all these tears, and you suddenly expect Leonardo DiCaprio to come along with a suitcase and at some point, and he's trying to convince basically that he's had an embolism of some kind while in the recall, and he has to want to escape. And then it becomes the Matrix, where it's take the red pill, and Laurie, the wife who isn't his wife, Sharon Stone, turns up and tries to convince him. And it's really clever. I mean, you can obviously see when it's coming, because at one it focuses on that he's got a bead of sweat.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's sweating clearly shows, and Schwarzenegger clearly twigs very quickly, if he's sweating, he can't be a computer imprint or anything like that, and just puts a hole in his head
Yeah.
very matter-of-factly, and then just beats up some random goons while he's at it again before Melina helps.
I think this scene is superb. I think it's probably one of the best examples of the film's really good writing, because it takes these potentially audience alienating concepts of different layers of reality and, this is real, this isn't real, and doesn't dumb it down, just very succinctly puts us into this situation. And you do sort of think, oh wow, is this possibly fake? Is this a dream? And it's interesting because some of the things that gets mentioned by the Doctor in this do end up happening, quite literally, because he does say, if you shoot me, the walls will come crashing down, which is exactly what happens when he shoots him. They break in through the walls, and he talks about being Cohagen's bosom buddy, which turns out he is. And then there's earlier scenes in Recall where the name of the program that he's going to be in, the secret agent program, is called Blue Sky on Mars, which is exactly what happens at the end of the film. And you do sort of double think, and the idea that when he does shoot the Doctor, he is now just irreversibly lost in this fantasy, which is why the Sharon Stone character, why Laurie, just becomes bad again. But it could be that she becomes bad again because she was lying that whole time when she comes in and says, I love you, I love you. And that's what I love, is that you could read it this way, you can read it that way. And it is a magnificent bit, just the whole idea of the pill, that's like a symbol of him wanting to return to reality. It's very clever stuff, very clever.
And again, it just works on that way of reminding you that this isn't just a shoot 'em up. We've had explosions, we've had bullets, we've had free breasts, we've had all this stuff, and yet underneath it all is still this story about what's real, what isn't. Are you imagining it? Are you remembering it? It's clever the way they've done it. And of course, this part eventually leads into the ultimate fight between Melina and Laurie, which it's fantastic.
It's a brilliant fight. It's really good.
And I'm not just saying that as a middle-aged man, but
No.
the fact that it's interesting that they didn't film it as a cat fight, which is obviously the kind of default. How do you get two attractive women fighting? I was scratching and stuff, but
yeah,
they actually got Vic Armstrong in, that kind of the famous stuntman, to kind of choreograph it to make it look like an actual fight between essentially trained, say, soldiers, but people who've gone through fight training.
Yeah.
And it still looked really horny.
Yeah, it's a good balance. It's sleazy and demure, this fight. It's
Demure.
demure. Yeah, it's really no, but yeah, you get the sense that it's quite an athletic fight. They're like they're just high kicks and sort of slams to the back and everything. And yeah, it's Arnie's almost like they don't play it up as in like Arnie's going, oh, look at these two women fight, but he is a bit like, whoa, this is getting serious. And then and she almost gets the upper hand, and gets her gets Melina with the knife. And then obviously we get the scene that was spoiled in all the trailers. But then consider that a divorce is, you couldn't not put it in the trailer, because it could be his best one-liner for me. I just think it's hilarious, and it's one of the best payoffs ever.
Sweetheart, be reasonable. After all, we're married.
Consider that a divorce.
That was your wife? What a bitch.
And the bit before where she says, "Oh, you wouldn't do this to me. We're married." And boom, boom. I'm sure there are other ones. Obviously, Let Off Some Steam is brilliant. There's some funny ones in The Running Man. But I remember when I saw the trailer for this, and I just cracked up at that bit. I know a person's just died, and but I didn't care. I just thought it was hilarious. And everybody I know thinks that's a really funny line.
We get this part again where it's becoming a recurring theme. Quaid is being chased by Richter, except in this time it's not a Johnny Cab, it's Benny Cab, and they have this shootout in a bar, and
Yeah.
it works well. Again, it's a shootout, and obviously some of our character, the free-boobed woman dies, and it's quite clever in the way that they don't see this through. They don't slaughter everyone. Cohagen, overseeing this, just says rather than kill them all, just cut off their air.
Yeah.
And they retreat where, and allow them to suffocate, because it's quite easy to do that. I suppose if you control the air supply on Mars, then suffocating people is probably quite easy.
Yeah.
But after all this, we get the ultimate scene where Quaid is taken to Quato, and Quato is the kind of he's sort of billed as the. I mean, this is the old adage that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, and all you hear from Cohagen on his various news bulletins, because this is a Verhoeven film, there's got to be news footage, and this is Quato, the terrorist who's trying to destroy everything on Mars, and it turns out he's the one who's trying to free Mars from the control of Cohagen. Quato is played as he's essentially a being, because it's a mutant. He lives on the body of the guy who's the baddie from Twins. He's played by Michael Gove. If you don't know, it's quite easy. It's quite straightforward. Google Quato and Google Michael Gove.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's an amazing career, because he's already played Tote in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and now he's playing an alien. I read on Wikipedia that Quato and the bad guy from Twins, that they are brothers, which made me think, because the idea that the mutants are the way they are is because they've been digging in Mars, and exposure to all this sort of radiation and alien poison has mutated their bodies. So I guess the idea being that they were fused as one person. This is not obvious at all in the film as to that's happened, but the fact that they are two separate entities made that just kind of the thing that I assumed was the case. I'm not sure, but he can read minds, and we go into Open Your Mind.
Now, open your mind to me.
The Open Your Mind bit, I must say, I've listened to the RoboCop podcast, and you were saying, that there was a song that sampled 20 Seconds to Comply, and I listened to it. I was like, this is really good. And I remember when I was younger that some song sampled Open Your Mind, like the quote that Quato says. And I checked it out online, and yeah, it's true. It's that, but it also samples this Simple Minds song called New Gold Dream, which is one of my favorite songs. So that plus Total Recall, it's quite a banger, to be honest. I sound like a 38-year-old when I say that, but it's really, really good. And so yeah, I'll have to try and legitimately purchase that, because I want to contribute to the cause. But speaking of causes, this whole idea that one man's freedom fighters and another one's terrorists, it makes me think earlier on in the film, when I think it's when Quaid gets into the cab with Benny for the first time, and there's an explosion. And he says, "Oh, it's the rebels," and all that. So I guess we're meant to assume that that's Quato's people who are doing that. That didn't seem to sort of, I don't know, because I don't get the sense that Quato is this kind of crazy murderous person. It made me think, oh, is Cohagen staging these scenes of violence to turn the public against the rebels? I'm not sure. Could have been. It's never confirmed.
No, it isn't actually, and it doesn't take long for the drills to come in, and there's another shootout, and then Quato dies. He gets shot in the head by Richter after the host body is killed. It's all very ugly and unpleasant, especially the fact that Quato looks like a baby. It's just weird. And I mean, I'll just reference something that I know a couple of people. I've made this joke a couple of times. One of my other things I do on social media is I watch Finnish football, because that's my other hobby, which is weird. But there's a player who played for one of the clubs in Finland who was called Quato. And I won't go into the story too much, but he signed for a club in Finland, turned up, said, "I'm better than all of you," promptly got kicked out. He then re-signed for the club later on. And it's amazing how few people seem to understand the whole Quato lives thing. I mean, Quato's back.
Yeah.
And at the time of writing, I think he got sacked again about 3 weeks ago. So,
They think he's fucking George Washington, don't they? But he's not.
and at this point, Benny reveals that he's only got 4 kids to feed, and
He's a baddie.
he's a villain. But he's a mutant, so he's obviously a sellout of some kind.
Well, yeah, we were sort of when I was talking to my mate Mark about this, the idea that if he was a Cohagen sympathizer, so to speak, and the idea that we find out soon that Cohagen spies couldn't access Quato because they would be sussed out with the psychic. They'd get rumbled when they'd realise the psychics would read their mind. It's like, well, why didn't they read Benny's mind and realise he was up to no good? And the idea maybe that mutants can't read other mutants' minds. I'm not sure. Sort of like when you watch a film 100 times, you sort of try and you can't help but think, is that a plot hole? Is that it's nothing you'd notice on the first time or the second or the third or the fifth or the 10th, but after a while you sort of maybe do pick holes, and then you kind of almost make up excuses to sort of protect the film. And we kind of came to the decision. It was like, yeah, he's a mutant. Mutants can't read other mutants, so that's the reason.
It's a shame it doesn't work that easily, I suppose. But this is when so Quaid gets taken to Cohagen's office, and Cohagen was Dick Jones from RoboCop, or Ronnie Cox to give him his full name, but he really is a dirty villain, isn't he? He's a nasty fucker, and he just plays it so well. And one of the quotes that, and you said it to me on Twitter when I said I was watching the film, and he said, "Best mind fuck yet," because it turns out that he shows a video, and he says, "I've got a surprise for you," and Schwarzenegger goes, "What, have you got my mother?" And he says it's actually him, or Hauser, to give him his proper name, that Hauser, Schwarzenegger's Cohagen's sort of buddy all along, and they wanted him to come back to Mars to kind of finish the job, to kill Quato. And it's strange that
very clever.
There's various subplots around. They don't want to kill Quaid partly because of the information he knows, because as we find out later, he has the key to unlocking all of this, but also because he's trusted enough that he gets in and Quato's dead as a result. It's fantastic, again, just on another layer, working it so that you have to think about these things and who can you trust, and at what point does this all become real and what's not.
No, yeah, absolutely, yeah. It's a superb twist, and this is another scene of brilliant dialogue again, of relaying this information and pulling the rug from underneath you. And we're about half an hour away from the end, and it just throws this curveball, which again, totally unexpected. Arnold Schwarzenegger films don't have plot twists. They really don't. They barely have plots, to be honest. So this, was quite a shocker back then. But the sort of the relish of Cohagen sort of, he's sort of twisting the knife in almost. He's like, when Arnie's like, whatever, you don't have anything on me or something. And then, Cohagen knows the truth. He knows once Quaid sees this video, his world's going to come crashing down. And he is such a despicable villain. But I love to hate him because he's such a great performance. And he and I think Verhoeven did this thing quite well, where you have a chief villain and then you have their kind of lackey. And they did that in RoboCop with Dick Jones and Clarence Boddicker. And they had a kind of slight love-hate thing going on there. In both films, there's scenes where the two of them have a bit of an argument, and they kind of get over it. But Richter, Michael Ironside this is probably. He can overplay it sometimes with his villain roles. I mean, I don't know if you've seen Highlander 2, but that's probably the most scenery chewing performance that he's ever given. It's a bit too much. He's eating the screen, and it's a bit too much there. But in Total Recall, it's because the anger is so tight-lipped and he's struggling to keep it in because he has to do what he's told. He sort of lets loose a few times. He has a proper little scream when Arnie gets away in the tube earlier on in the film, and then there's that hilarious bit near the end where they're shooting the hologram, and he thinks he's got him, and the look of sheer joy in his face that he's finally managed to get one over on Quaid. It's I don't know, it's quite relatable. You know what I mean? Because because it's almost like the Itchy and Scratchy in The Simpsons, where there's that one episode where Scratchy manages to kill Itchy, and it's like, it's wrong, but I'm kind of looking forward to seeing this because it never happens. And I kind of was with Richter for a second there when he was sort of like almost having an orgasm over, killing Quaid, but then it falls apart with the hologram. What I like about the two villains is that yes, they're irredeemably awful, but they each of them do have their kind of their soft spot. They have like a person who they really care about. And with Richter, it's Laurie. He's obviously, well, in some Wikipedia entries, they're apparently married. But obviously he's incredibly burned out when she gets killed. And there is this sense that Cohagen is kind of very reluctantly putting the death order on Hauser / Quaid when everything goes pear-shaped in a few minutes' time. Because I guess they were friends, but in the end, Arnie has to die. Not saying these are three-dimensional villain roles, but it's those little touches that I quite like.
We all wish we had a Richter in our lives.
I every day.
And there's even the little part where Quaid is being put back into the machine, the recall machine with Melina. And when he's being tied up and he says to the doctor, or Richter says to the doctor, is he going to remember this? No, and punches him in the face.
Yeah.
Just for that little bit of power. It's just that kind of, he won't remember it, but I'll feel better.
Oh yeah, no. It's the sheer, like, when he says, oh, he's not going to remember a thing, his face just lights up. He goes like, oh really? And then gives him a proper punch. And again, it's the whole later thing, like when Victor's like, going nuts over killing Quaid. It's like I do get a kind of sick pleasure of that little moment, to be honest, of watching Arnie get smacked proper in the face. But it doesn't last long, because we're going to get, when I was young and watched this next scene is so unbelievably violent. My jaw dropped at the time. It's gross.
I mean, we talked about it on RoboCop. Maybe it was this Verhoeven thing where he liked people getting stabbed in the neck, because as Quaid lifts this bolt clean out, it's clearly a rubbish restraint if it just lifts out, and then he stabs the technician in the neck, and then these. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know many kind of medical professionals sort of outside of the profession, but I wouldn't be. I'd be surprised to see a number of them immediately grabbing axes and poles and immediately wading into someone who's clearly not happy.
That's true. They do have a lot of weapons on hand there, don't they? And they get done over really badly. I remember the one with the neck is quite disgusting, but it's the one with the guy who gets like a pole sort of rammed up his nose and then out the back of his head. And I think that Verhoeven he loves violence. There's no doubt about it. He shoots it in a way that is really like a boy sort of dropping a spider down his sister's dress or whatever, to scare it, to revolt, to disgust them, and there's shots in this, people stepping over dead bodies, all those, there's shots in the Last Resort massacre that are just really grotesque. And there is a sense of, and in RoboCop, as well, and Flesh and Blood, which was the film he made before RoboCop, which is this sort of grim and nasty sort of medieval adventure where the bad guys are bad and the good guys are even worse, and there's lots of raping and pillaging and bloodthirsty nastiness, and there is a sort of sense of just reveling in a way in that kind of gruesomeness. But in Flesh and Blood, it's quite disturbing and unpleasant, whereas in Total Recall, there's almost like a glee, a sort of like, oh, this is horrible, isn't it? I mean, I do get a kick out of the violence in Total Recall, to be honest. Like that bit when, because these bad guys are so awful that you want justice against them to be brutal and well deserved, and they get it. They get it good. But there's also bits that are quite sadistic, like, was there any really real reason to have Richter shoot that rat and have its brains blasted into the screen? It's so unnecessary. You can tell he's trying to shock us a hell of a lot. I mean, the very first scene, you see Arnie's eyes pretty much bulge out of his head, and obviously in the next film he did, Basic Instinct, sort of has one of the all-time kind of classic shocking openings, and he throws both elements in. It's like, this big sex scene, and then you've got an ice pick going through someone's head, and it's like, he knows he's a provocateur and I think that's what some people don't like about Verhoeven, is he's very gratuitous. But when he does it well, I think he does it brilliantly. I think he's a really entertaining director. I think, yeah, but you do sometimes feel a bit queasy watching his films because, gross.
But then we find Benny dying in a glorious way later,
That's
where
great.
he dies by Quaid essentially drilling through his drill and shouting "Screw you!" It's not quite the sort of let off some steam or I let him go or anything like that, but
I
it's
love it.
still, it's still decent.
I
Still
love it.
decent.
It does what it says. It's a Ronseal one-liner, isn't it? And yeah, I got what I paid for when I saw that. And he deserves it as well because, he's a traitor. He shot Quato. He shot Quato's brother. And yeah, it's disgusting. Total Recall was originally rated X by the MPAA, which is like the Americans sort of BBFC, and they demanded that quite a lot of shots were sort of trimmed or cut. So the bit on the escalator when the poor guy gets shot, or what else? But there's Benny's death and the scene in the that we just talked about in the reimplantation room or whatever. Some of these shots were kind of trimmed a little bit, and they've never been reinserted. It's not like RoboCop's director's cut, which, sadistically or not, I'm very happy that those those scenes of violence were put back in. But with Total Recall, that's not been the case, unfortunately. So, and it's one of those where they probably just they used it as landfill, that footage. It's somewhere underneath the M25, and it's gone forever.
And now after this, we go to the reactor because as part of Quato's sort of opening of the mind into Quaid, we've established that there is a reactor in the mines underneath Mars. That if this reactor is turned on, it basically activates all the air and allows oxygen to basically give air to everyone on Mars, which is kind of what Cohagen's trying to prevent. Now, as Melina and Quaid turn up, they use this hologram projecting watch. I don't have an Apple Watch. I suppose it's sort of app you can buy for $2.99, but
yeah,
it's very much like the ending of Superman 2, where they have, oh, you think you're killing your bad guy? Oh, no, he's not. He's not there. It's a hologram.
yeah.
And it's a little bit weird because think of the logistics. Are they having to pretend and carry out their actions somewhere else
Yeah.
in hiding to generate this kind of I don't want to think too much about it. As my wife sat and watched the film. Well, she didn't watch the film. She was kind of sitting next to me while I was watching it, and I did say a couple of times, "I'm not a doctor, or I'm not a scientist, but."
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of bits that don't really make a lot of sense. But then, and you mentioned when Richter thinks he's killed Quaid, and there's that look of glee, and then it turns out Quaid gets up and starts laughing like a maniac, and then turns up behind them and shoots them all. But Richter's death shortly afterwards is quite gruesome, and that was actually talking about the ratings. That was actually referred to in the ratings from the BBFC,
Yeah.
because as he's fighting Quaid, he sort of slips off this lift that's going up, and he gets his arms cut off by the platform, and he falls down, and Schwarzenegger's waving these two arms around. And the BBFC ratings actually say under violence, and I'll quote: in one sequence, a man's arms are cut off by an elevator platform, resulting in gory detail. Now, I love reading these, and I've got a whole thread of them on Twitter, mostly of films that I've done episodes on. But here they talk about moderate sex references in which a mutant prostitute exposes her free breasts.
Oh, they took all the fun out of that with that very sort of dry explanation, didn't they?
But then the whole premise of the film, they describe it as Total Recall is a sci-fi action adventure from 1990 in which a man takes a virtual holiday to Mars with unforeseen consequences, which makes it sound like an episode of Mr. Bean.
With hilarious consequences. Yes, exactly.
It's ridiculous.
Not how I'm glad they didn't, do the synopsis for the back of the video, which oddly enough is the only instance where it tells you that this film is actually set in the year 2084, because there's no mention of it in the film. And
Okay.
but Verhoeven has been on record saying yes, it is set in 2084, definitely. So
Okay.
yeah,
That's a relief. Otherwise, I'd have to delete this
delete this
episode.
episode.
Now, as Quaid makes it up to the top level of the mine thing with the switch and the how it, I mean, it looks like it's like a you put your hand in it and turn it, but all you have to do is put your hand in it. If you do like a Mr. Spock kind of live long and prosper sort of thing with your
That's
hand,
exactly what I thought. Yeah.
and Cohagen's there with a gun. You know, he's full Dick Jones here,
Oh yeah.
and it's just it's a weird sort of confrontation between the two because um, Melina turns up on the lift and shoots him as they're having this conversation about what are you going to do, and Melina shoots him. He just happens to have a bomb as I mean there must be like a dead man switch or something like that on it,
Yeah.
and so Quaid throws the bomb away, which then blows up a window, which the whole atmosphere thing, and there's the bit where Quaid manages to turn the reactor on. So Dick gets this sounds awful. I was going to say Dick gets sucked out of the hole, which is a completely different movie.
You should write the
And
BBFC guidelines because they sound your versions sound a lot more fun.
I keep tagging them in my posts and hope they'll offer me a job.
Yeah.
And then Dick gets sucked out the hole.
Yep.
And then Quaid, having turned on the reactor, also gets, how can I say, he and Melina also end up outside.
Yep.
And then this is the bit where I said, I'm not a doctor, but now because they're outside and there's no air,
Yeah.
and their faces, and you mentioned the eye popping and everything else, how do their faces contort really badly? And how do they, does that not do permanent damage? Because within 5 seconds of all the air coming out, which is very much again the plot from Spaceballs, all the air comes out, they suddenly are fine again, and yet their faces go back to normal. I mean, there's no stretching, there's no
Yep.
bulbous looking anything wrong with you. Just that look absolutely fine.
Even their hair
It's
looks fine. It's preposterous. I'm going to go back to the Neon magazine thing because they talk about this scene. Dr. X, that's the name of the guy because he prefers to remain anonymous, said, I doubt they'd survive. It certainly wouldn't be his eyes that started blowing up first. It would be parts of the body that contained air, the lungs, the bowels. There'd be a lot of soiled underwear. Nope, this is just bollocks. I can't believe you can just be dumped on the surface of Mars and survive. And they said final diagnosis is brain damage, shock, multiple trauma, multiple fractures, multiple all sorts of stuff, soiled pants, scrotum the size of a Prada handbag, unquestionably dead. There you go.
how to ruin it.
I know. That's the thing. It's like I'm kind of glad I'm kind of glad that I'm stupid, so I just get to enjoy the film. But Cohagen's death is horrible. I mean, it's really. I mean, there's stuff you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, but this is grotesque. And do you know the magazine Fangoria, which is the sort of
I'm aware,
yeah, I mean, they don't hold back on their front covers on their issues. They just show you the most disgusting special effect. And in this case, it's Cohagen and his sort of final moment where his eyes are popped out on stalks and his tongue sort of, it's just horrible. I mean, it's the sort of thing like if I saw that in W.H. Smith, I'd be like, oh, put that in the back. It's nasty. But and there was even there was these Total Recall trading cards, and that image was one of the trading cards. And I just thought, oh no, that'll put you off your bubble gum, wouldn't it? Really? Oh, okay. Yeah, it depends then, I suppose. But yeah, that bit is horrible. And yeah, the effects, the Cohagen effects look amazing when he's dying, but they do look a bit goofy on Arnie, mainly because Arnie's doing that thing, that sort of sound he makes whenever he's in pain, where he sort of goes ar, 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 like that, and he does it all the time in his films. I love it. I love seeing him sort of get attacked. He sort of just goes ar, ar, and he does that a lot, which is fair enough because he's got no air. Speaking of air, obviously a great quote from it is,
Come on, Cohagen, you got what you want. Give these people air.
I haven't talked much because I love Arnie's accent. I love it. I love his delivery. I think he's brilliant. And there are a lot of funny choice bits of dialogue. I'll spare your listeners my sort of Arnie repertoire of impersonations, but yeah, Give These People Air is is one of my favourites, definitely.
That's what editing software is for.
Oh, thank you.
Um, and this is again like an ambiguous ending kind of thing where they, the planet all has air, and all the people in the strip club have got air now, so they're not being suffocated, and everything's just like, oh great, happy days, everyone just. And again, this is I'm not a scientist, but isn't Mars going to be really cold? And everyone just walks out and la, 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 la.
Yeah, the terraforming
but-
takes place over 3 minutes in this film, and
Yeah.
it would take a little bit longer.
And then Melina, of course, they're holding hands, and she says, "Kiss me quick before you wake up," to kind of imply that is this still a dream?
Yeah.
I know he kind of invites it, but it's still it leaves you with that thing. Is like, is this just his holiday? Is this the Club 1830 recall package that he paid for?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I think it's not like, because I do think of the ending of Inception, which with the whole thing with the spinning top, which it cuts to black before you see it fall over or not. And apparently, when during screenings of that film, that produced like a massive groan from audiences. It was like, oh, open ending, don't like that, couldn't you just told us? Whereas Total Recall's ending's a bit more subtle because, yes, it fades to white, but I'll be honest with you, when I first watched it, I mean, admittedly, I was only 12, but I didn't think, oh, is it a dream? Is it a dream? It's kind of, it's a loose end, but it's much more of an end. It's not, I don't think I don't think it leaves the audience hanging so much. It's the themes are there in this film if you want to find them and if you want to see them, but they don't throw them in your face so much. And I think that's where Total Recall really works, because it works as a total crowd pleaser. And this is a very crowd pleasing film, I think. I think the trailers, like the TV spots, were saying, get ready for the ride of your life. And, it's playing up the whole roller coaster element. And as the writer wanted it, he wanted it to be Raiders of the Lost Ark Goes to Mars. And for all the fact that it's an, X-rated, 18-rated action film, very bloody, very, nasty, it's also very satisfying, and it was a huge hit. It's a summer blockbuster. I guess we're not used to summer blockbusters these days that are comfortable with their, 18 certificates and are happy to be strictly for adults. But at the same time, yes, it's a very, it's a very crowd pleasing film, but everybody will enjoy it. And to be honest, I don't really know many people apart from those doctors in that Neon magazine who don't like this film. I think a lot of people love this film. Even people who don't really like Arnold Schwarzenegger films, they'll say, "Well, that one's good," because it's like a bit more clever or a bit more cerebral and stuff like that. But then you've got that. The 12-year-old me loves this film, but then the adult me loves it just as much because there is so much going on under the surface, and it is rare that an Arnie film that actually makes you think. I think in terms of satire, I think it's a notch below Verhoeven's other films like RoboCop and Starship Troopers. I think there's a lot more cutting humour in those films. I think that Total Recall works more on I never quite say it's about an Arnie film, but it works much more on a philosophical level than, say, the Arnie's other films. But I think the satire is kind of, there's not really much room for satire because there's too much action, there's too much mind fuckery and stuff like that, and that's fine. It's a brilliant film of that kind.
I don't know. There was some philosophy in Hercules of New York, or
I never saw
Raw
that one.
Deal.
I never saw that one. Yeah.
Make sure you look for the undubbed version.
Oh, okay. I'll look for that on YouTube. Yeah.
It's probably still there.
Yeah.
But I mean, one thing, and I purposely haven't made a point of it, talking about. I won't call it the remake, but the more recent Total Recall movie, because it wasn't a remake of this film. It was it was basically a different adaptation of the source material. So,
right.
I know there are a lot of various themes that are the same, but I don't really see it as in the way that I discussed the RoboCop sequel, for example, remake, for example. I mean, that was one, it was rubbish and lost any sense of humor. But Total Recall, it didn't try and remake it, so I guess it kind of almost, I wouldn't say it has a pass, but I don't consider it in the same kind of league, and which means even though it's got Colin Farrell in it, I shouldn't dislike it as much as I dislike the RoboCop remake. But I only watched it once, and I kind of came away thinking, and that was it.
Yeah,
It's so unmemorable. But
I've not seen it. I think it came out about sort of roughly 10 years ago, and I'd really had my fill of remakes. I think I'd seen like the Omen remake and the Wicker Man remake. And I remember the Hitcher remake. That was the one where I was like, I'm not going to see this because I've been burned too many times. And I that sort of carried on with all sort of future remakes. But as a result, I've missed out on some films that actually have turned out to be pretty damn good movies. Like the Evil Dead remake is really good. It's really good. And Friday the 13th one is a decent film. But at the time, I just thought I'm not paying money and wasting my time to see these films that I'm only going to see for curiosity value, and they're going to disappoint me. And that's been the case with Total Recall. I mean, if it's on the telly, in a couple of days' time, which you probably will, it seems like one of those ITV 2, 3, 4 sort of mainstays. I think I will watch it because I've got nothing to kind of lose, really. I can just get on with something else, do the ironing or something. There's no real kind of expectation. But there was this. It just seemed like, oh, why are you remaking Total Recall? And it seemed pointless. But like I said at the start, the Arnie film is so different from the novel, because the novel, I mean, it's not really a novel, it's a short story, really. It's only about sort of 12, 15 pages long, and it kind of follows the plot of the film, and the 1990 film, and the Dick story are very similar up until the point when Arnie has the implant. Same sort of thing. You realise he was a secret agent, but then they go off into totally different territory. And there's enough that's different that you think, yes, they could make another version of this, and it could work. Very much like Blade Runner. The Blade Runner, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, is very different to the film. There's same characters, same sort of elements in some respect, but they are very, very different. If someone said I'm remaking Blade Runner, people go, no, 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 that's a terrible idea. But if someone said I'm kind of adapting Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, I would be interested in seeing that, because I think there's enough there that could work. And I'd be the same really with We Can Dream It for Your Wholesale. That's the thing with Dick novels; they don't have catchy titles. You can't blame them for switching them, really, because that ain't going to fit on a marquee. It's just
no, and I can't imagine they're saying we can remember this for your wholesale.
no.
Rather than saying he might have Total Recall.
You might exactly. Yeah.
Jimmy, thank you very much for bringing and again, this is probably a VHS copy of.
Actually, it's Laserdisc. This one, Way of the Future, because we're in the 90s. So yeah,
the future.
It has special features on it. This does scene access and interactive menus. That's very impressive.
Yep. Yeah, but I did once joke about doing a 90s series of films called Laserdisc Video Club, and someone corrected me, saying, "Oh, I think you'll find Laserdiscs were around in the 1970s."
That's true, but only the very rich could probably afford those, to be honest. And I'd never heard of Laserdiscs until the 90s. I mean, so yeah, they're 90s.
Yeah,
doesn't matter what that person said. Yeah.
Well, we don't have to rewind this Laserdisc then, but and I guess if people are listening to this, then Patreon subscribers who are of the right tier have voted to hear Total Recall this month. And now, Jimmy, where can people find your social media, and what can they expect from your various writings that you're very busy doing?
Well, my Twitter handle is @JimmyFletcher. That's JIMI, so like Hendrix. And yes, I will mostly be tweeting about films and music, and I also have my own site, which is fletchtalks.wordpress.co.uk, .com, sorry. And there I will be writing about films, and I've kind of got back into. I love the old cartoon, The Real Ghostbusters, and I've been over the course of 10 years, I've been trying to do an episode guide of the first sort of 70 episodes, say the good years, and it's taken me a long time, but I've finally got back to doing it. So that's fun. I also contribute to VHS Revival, which is not Betamax, VHS, sorry. And we basically, the site concentrates on any and every film from the sort of 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I also contribute to Game Tripper, which is a site about personal memories of video games. I just recently had an article published on there about the video game Zombies Ate My Neighbors for the Super Nintendo, which is one of my favourites. So yeah, that's where you can find me. So if you fancy some self-indulgent witterings and you've made it to the end of this podcast, then yeah, give it a go.
Lovely. Well, I'll put plenty of links to those in the show notes on the Patreon site, and as is the tradition that I like to follow on here, it's quite easy to, we talked about the Jerry Goldsmith score, how great it is, but I'm a stickler for tradition.
Yep.
And now, when this film was released in the UK, this was the 27th of July 1990. The number one song in the UK charts at the time was "Sacrifice" by Elton John, or "Sacrifice."
That's the one.
I
love it.
So, we're going to play out a Arnold Schwarzenegger film with a bit of Elton John. So don't say this podcast don't do everything for you. Anyway, Jimmy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rich. It's been great. Thank you.
Some things like